I was standing at the sink, cold tile pressed against my shoes. My hands were already wet, soap suds clinging to my fingers. I didn't remember walking in here. The fluorescent lights hummed, a dull, constant buzz. I felt a familiar weariness settle deep in my bones. Sarah walked in then. She moved slowly. Her eyes rolled back, a fixed, unsettling smile on her face. Her voice was flat, distorted, like a broken record. The reflection must always match, always. She blinked once, hard. Her eyes snapped forward. The smile vanished. "Oh, Tvero, you all right? You look tired." She walked past me into a stall. I didn't move. I just stood there, the words echoing. I reached into my pocket, my fingers finding the smooth, cool brass of my key. That felt wrong. The silence in the room felt heavy. I looked up into the mirror. My reflection stared back. Then my reflection blinked. I kept my eyes wide open. It blinked again. I forced my eyes away from the mirror. My hands were still wet. I needed to finish the task. The cold water ran. The sound felt off, too hollow. I focused on the soap. I rubbed my palms together. I tried to ignore the reflection, but the fluorescent lights above me began to flicker. A rapid, uneven pulse. In the mirror, the lights stayed perfectly still, a constant, unwavering glow. My reflection watched me. It was unblinking now. A tremor started in my chest. The rule echoed. The reflection must always match. Always. How could I make it match? It was doing its own thing. I squeezed the brass key in my pocket. The sharp edge pressed into my palm. I wanted to look away, to break the gaze, but something held me there. My reflection slowly raised its hand. I didn't move. Was it testing me? The water in the sink began to churn, a low gurgle. This routine wasn't working. It was only delaying. My reflection's hand was still raised. I slowly lifted my own right hand. My reflection mirrored the movement, but it was a fraction of a second late. A subtle, unsettling delay. I lowered my hand quickly. My reflection's hand dropped even slower, like it was moving through thick water. This wasn't right. The rule echoed, a cold whisper in my mind. The reflection must always match. Always. But it wasn't matching. It was doing its own thing. I looked around the bathroom, the polished chrome of the faucet, the shiny dispenser for paper towels. Every surface was a potential mirror. I turned my head slightly. In the chrome, my reflection's eyes darted first, then mine followed. A shiver ran down my spine. I reached out, touching the cold porcelain sink. My reflection's hand pressed against the mirror, but its fingers curled inward, not outward. When I pulled my hand back, a faint, new scratch marked the porcelain where its fingers had been. A thin, white line. I felt the brass key in my pocket, a small comfort. The evidence was clear. I stared at the thin, white line on the porcelain. It was real. I could feel it under my thumb. The reflection hadn't just looked wrong. It had acted wrong. And it left a mark. I pulled out my small inspection mirror, the one I kept for checking tight spaces. My reflection in the main mirror watched me, its head tilting a beat too late. I held the inspection mirror up, angling it to catch my face. In its surface, my reflection appeared normal at first. Then, my reflection in the main mirror raised its hand, but the reflection in the small mirror didn't. It just stared, unblinking. I tried to adjust the angle, to force a match. The small mirror's reflection began to distort, stretching my face, while the main mirror's reflection remained perfectly still, watching. My tools were useless. My logic failed. The rule was clear. The reflection must always match, always. But nothing matched. I felt a cold dread settle in. The scratch on the sink was a stark reminder. I gripped the brass key in my pocket. Its coolness, a small anchor in the growing strangeness. I was walking. My feet moved on their own. The corridor stretched ahead, long and empty. I knew this hallway. It led to the supply room. I needed to get there. But the walls felt different. The paint was peeling in new places. I saw a door on my left. It was a heavy, fire-rated door. I had never seen it before. I kept walking. The air grew colder. I felt a dampness. I looked down. My shoes were wet. A thin layer of frost coated the floor. Inside, I thought. How? I pressed my hand against the wall. It was icy. I saw my breath. I kept moving forward. The corridor curved. It curved too much. It was looping back. I could see the same peeling paint, the same strange door. I stopped. I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the brass key. The cold from the hallway seeped into my bones. The scratch on the sink, the one from my reflection, felt like a distant memory. This was a different kind of wrong. I just watched the frost spread. I stopped. The frost spread. It covered the floor, creeping up the walls. I saw my breath again. The cold was a constant ache now. I noticed a faint shimmer in the ice, just ahead. It wasn't a door, it was a panel, almost invisible. I pressed my hand against it. The ice cracked, a spiderweb pattern forming. The panel slid inward without a sound. Inside, the air was still colder. It smelled of ozone and old metal. Wires snaked across the floor. They led to a console, dark and silent. Diagrams covered the walls. They were etched into the metal, not drawn. They showed impossible loops, corridors folding in on themselves. A single repeating symbol marked each junction. I traced one with my finger. The metal was smooth, impossibly old. A low hum started then, deep in the floor. It vibrated through my shoes, up my legs. It felt like the whole building was alive. And it was designed this way, deliberate, permanent. I gripped the brass key in my pocket. The cold felt different now. It was not just the air, it was the system. The low hum deepened into a guttural roar. The etched lines on the metal walls pulsed with an angry blue light. The air crackled with ozone. My cold ache sharpened, a knife twisting in my bones. The floor beneath me bucked violently. I stumbled, my hand slamming against the sparking console. Wires snapped, showering the space with bright, fleeting embers. The impossible loops on the walls weren't just diagrams anymore. They were active. Sections of the wall began to slide, grinding against each other, reconfiguring the corridor in real time. A narrow opening appeared ahead, a jagged tear in the shifting metal. It was closing, fast. I gasped, the frigid air burning my lungs. My fingers tightened around the brass key in my pocket, its familiar weight a desperate comfort. This was my only chance. I pushed off the console, my legs burning, and launched myself towards the shrinking gap. I scraped through, feeling the metal shriek and seal behind me with a deafening clang. My chest heaved. I stumbled forward, gasping. The guttural roar faded, replaced by a deep, persistent thrumming. It vibrated through the floor. My chest burned. A sharp pain shot up my arm. I had scraped against the closing metal. I looked back. The wall was seamless. No sign of the opening remained. Only smooth, dark panels, still faintly glowing with residual blue. The air still tasted metallic. It was thick with ozone. Dust motes danced in the dim light. They caught the faint blue. I pushed myself up. My legs trembled. My fingers went to the brass key in my pocket. Its cool weight was a small comfort against the lingering heat. A thin red line was already forming on my forearm. It was a fresh scar from the impossible architecture. The corridor ahead was different. Not just a continuation, but a new configuration of angles and shadows. It was silent. It was waiting. The metallic taste still lingered. One moment, I was in the silent, angular corridor. The next, I was back at my desk. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Papers were stacked neatly. My monitor glowed with familiar data. Everything looked normal. It felt like a sudden shift, not a journey. I touched the cool brass key in my pocket. Its weight was reassuring. My forearm still throbbed. I traced the fresh red line with my other hand. The impossible architecture had left its mark. I looked around the office. The air felt heavy, stretched thin in places. It was a subtle tension, like a fabric pulled too tight. I glanced at the window. The reflection of the building across the street was slightly off. Its angles didn't quite align with the real structure. A faint blue residue clung to the edge of my desk, almost invisible. It was the same blue from the closing wall. I wiped it with my thumb. It smeared, then vanished. This place felt like a cage. My job, I realized, was just containment. The scars were constant reminders of what I was trying to hold back. I sat at my desk, the fluorescent hum a dull, constant drone. My fingers brushed the cool brass key in my pocket, its weight a familiar anchor. The scar on my forearm throbbed, the thin red line against my skin, a fresh reminder. The faint blue residue on the desk had vanished, but I knew it had been there. The reflection in the window still didn't quite match the building across the street. It was all so familiar now. The sudden shifts, the impossible architecture, the rules delivered by others. I was always back here, always at the start of another task. My observations, my quiet understanding, they changed nothing. The anomalies would keep coming. The world would keep stretching and snapping back into place. My job wasn't to stop it, but to witness it, to contain the edges of the impossible. This wasn't a temporary state. This was the permanent structure. I was part of the mechanism, a conscious cog. The cage was not just around me. It was the world.